Bloomberg Tech is live from coast to coast with Caroline Hyde in New York and Ed Ludlow in San Francisco.
Welcome to a very special edition of Bloomberg Tech, live from Anduril's headquarters in Costa Mesa, California.
Today, we go all in on defense tech and discuss with some of the biggest names in this booming industry, competition with China, working with the US government, and a lot more. And we kick things off with Brian Schimpf, CEO of Anduril, as the first of many conversations. Brian, we're grateful to be here at Anduril. There has been a lot of hype around the company, a deep focus on what it is doing, how it is growing. And so as a place to start, would you just bring us up to speed on where Anduril is today, operationally, revenue, the business it is doing with the US government and Western allies?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on. Really excited to have you here. The Anduril has been around about 8 years, but we've grown incredibly in that time. I think this year we're going to be over 6,500 employees. We've got something like about half of them here in Costa Mesa. We're looking to basically double revenue this year. So we're about $1 billion last year. We'll go over $2 billion this year. And we're ramping production about 400%. So a lot of the mix is switching from a lot of the earlier stage things we were doing, which were kind of experimental, really learning what the technology could do, how to integrate it with warfighters. This year, we're really moving into this mode of really producing.
Brian, forgive me, we've actually got some breaking news that's just crossed the Bloomberg terminal. President Trump is saying that he was due to meet China's President Xi in 2 weeks' time. He's saying now that he sees no reason to do so. The team are going to put some of the headlines up on the screen, but Caro, a significant piece of news because part of what we wanted to discuss today was China. The president saying that he's calculating increased tariffs on Chinese products.
This is a dialing up of geopolitical tensions.
And Brian, bear with us. We are now seeing this quite sharp market reaction. Clearly, the S&P 500 has changed direction here because I think, jump in, Cara. I think part of the point is that we were headed in a different direction.
And this brings so many questions around what the TikTok relationship had been, and much of that had been sort of almost this linchpin in relationships between President Xi and indeed President Trump, but then been this ongoing narrative about how we could rectify and rehabilitate the relationship. There have been calls from China perhaps wanting yet further relief from some of the higher tariffs that they've been seeing.
Sorry, I've just pulled up the Truth Social post, and that's where the president's communicated, and he's basically saying that China is becoming very hostile. Let's get back to the conversation.
Well,
Cara.
your take, Brian, because in many ways, Anduril and defense tech as a whole is about the story of national security, and it is about US versus China. Is that where you see the key risks?
That is one of the key conflicts. But if you look worldwide, I mean, you've got land wars in Europe. You've got, the Red Sea still basically denied. Iran doesn't look like it's going to slow down anytime soon. China, beyond just the tensions with the US, has been constantly aggravating with the Philippines, constantly fighting over different islands and things like that. So you're in this period of just massive geopolitical instability, and China is obviously the focus. But I mean, they've had a very strategic view to this, right? Like they've they've put significant export controls on magnets for high-end semiconductors.
How hard is that? Rare earths, for example. We understand the breaking news of today as well, as China's making it harder and harder for rare earths to be exported, not just to the US, but to Europe.
Yeah, and I think this is part of a long-term strategic plan they have had, right? They have used industrial policy beyond just military power to construct a world where they have a lot of leverage over the US and their allies. They drive dependence on these things. And it's a very sophisticated strategy that they're playing.
Yes.
I think this is something that Trump recognizes. I think he is a very good negotiator. If he's saying these things, he understands what that means and how he is using that to position for maximum advantage. And so I think it's going to be a long-run conflict with China, and that's something we've just got to be prepared for.
Brian, thank you for rolling with this. The news is breaking as we go to air. The market's reacting. One of the things that we've just shown on the screen is the semiconductor index.
Yeah.
One reason why it's critically important to talk to you, Anduril, is your efforts to re-onshore the manufacturing base in this country in Ohio. But in research for being here today, Caroline and I looked a lot at the supply chain for your industry. Everything from wire harness through to GPUs that go on board a lot of the weapons behind us. Could you just expand on that a little bit? You know, why Arsenal 1 is so critical in that sense, in that context?
Absolutely. So, you know, when you look at defense is one of those areas where national security is paramount. Pulling these technologies onto U.S. and allied manufacturing is absolutely key. And the strategy we've taken with this is there's a lot of industrial capacity in the U.S. There's the ability to take advantage of largely commercial industry that can manufacture these things. But when you start stepping back, there's things that defense alone can't solve, right? These are things like, you know, the rare earth magnets, germanium supply. These are things that China has strategically tried to stranglehold. And this will require, beyond just stating as a policy that you have to source it from America, the sources are very, very limited. This is areas where I've been really encouraged by what the Trump administration has done around trying to reignite this idea of how do you do smart industrial policy? What is it going to look like in the U.S.? It's going to look different. It's going to be a combination of tariffs. It's going to be a combination of things they did with like MP materials, guaranteed offtake. There's just this very different strategy that needs to be taken to really solve this on a country level scale. And for us, we can be early adopters, right? Like we can take advantage of all those things. And we're building out a massive manufacturing complex in Ohio to be able to take advantage of all of those suppliers in the U.S. and build a lot of things here onshore.
Okay, so the breaking news is that the president has taken to Truth Social and he is saying that it looks like he now won't meet with China's Xi and things are changing. We will discuss that for the next hour. While we have you, Anduril has been in the headlines partly because of the insatiable appetite of all kinds of investors to be involved. You did a secondary or a tender for your employees. Would you talk about the focus you have right now on talent and that mechanism to keep people, basically?
No, absolutely. So the defense world has shifted a lot, right? Like a lot of the people in traditional defense industry are amazing at things like, you know, aircraft design and hypersonics and things along those lines. But the next generation of this really looks different. It really looks about software. It looks how you adopt commercial manufacturing approaches. It's how you mass manufacture these capabilities. It's a very different focus. We're moving out of an era where we need to make relatively few of very, very expensive high-end things. We're moving into an era where it's much more about how do we have things at scale that are smarter, that are more autonomous. And so this ability to attract the best talent into this really is coming from tech companies. It's coming from universities. It's people who otherwise would have jobs at, you know, kind of all the tech company brand names you would know. Part of that's compensation and liquidity and all the startup economics. But honestly, a lot more of it is just, do they get to work on exciting problems with people they like on things that really matter, right? And I think we present this opportunity to be very clear in our purpose and our mission, something that's going to be impactful. And they get to work on just amazing cutting edge things, right? Like making autonomous fighter jets and, you know, these reusable missiles is just an absolutely crazy thing to work on if you're a young engineer. And that's what we've really found is the formula to get the best and brightest here, is an exciting opportunity to actually contribute, give back, and build something incredible.
Ryan, what a joy to have you sat with us, rolling within breaking news, and to be surrounded by all of this gear that you are driving innovation on. Brian Schimpf, we appreciate you, CEO of Anduril. Now, we're here in Southern California because the area has become a hub for defense tech startups. But those companies, along with America's wider ambitions to reindustrialize, they're facing a few hurdles.
American startups are racing to rebuild the nation's military and aerospace industry.
It's only been within the past 5 years or so that we've really started to recognize that our primary adversary is China.
Tara Murphy-Doherty is CEO of defense software maker Govini.
They have made tremendous strides in manufacturing, stockpiling, as well as technology innovation, and that our dependence on them got away from us.
US drone maker Skydio experienced this firsthand. After it sold drones to Taiwan, China blocked Skydio's access to batteries. But US independence in military and aerospace manufacturing faces serious hurdles. Mock Industries highlighted that reality earlier this year. Responding to criticism that it used a Chinese airframe in a promotional video, Mock CEO said, "We feel comfortable blowing up Chinese components for testing purposes." Muck says its final product uses US airframes. Another issue for US manufacturing? An industrial labor shortage. Take the wire harness. These bundles of cables that deliver power and data are essential to everything, from phones to industrial machines to rockets. Making wire harnesses, though, is largely a manual process that can lengthen manufacturing time. Startup Senra aims to speed that up.
Everyone is trying to develop a lot faster. There's many programs that want prototypes within months versus years. And because wire harnessing is all custom made and it's one of the most critical components that goes into anything, even in the hardware market, it really forces the demand to really have this high uptick.
For the US to meet that current and future demand, it will have to fix these choke points on a wider scale. Until it does, US defense goals may be hard to meet.
Coming up, we speak with True Anomaly CEO Evan Rogers on the future of space defense and space as a domain for war. That's next. This is Bloomberg Tech. Breaking news from President Trump in a post on Truth Social. He is threatening a massive increase in tariffs on China. He is explaining in the post that he was due to meet with China's President Xi in 2 weeks' time, but now sees no reason to do so. He is saying that China has become very hostile. Markets immediately reacted to this. In equities, you see most of the major indices turn from modestly positive to now quite negative. The Nasdaq 100 is down 1%. Caroline, this relates to a story overnight out of China.
Yeah, the signals were there. The fact that China had unveiled broad new curbs on exports of rare earths, in particular other critical materials. All of this we understood was as they're building up to this meeting, key meeting within the month between President Trump and President Xi. So they were really trying to build up leverage ahead of these high-stakes
Semiconductors
meetings.
Down 2% on the stocks. We're at Anduril in California. This is a special edition of Bloomberg Tech about defense tech. As more companies pursue opportunities in the race to space, the importance of space deterrence is also rapidly growing. One company at the forefront is True Anomaly, which develops autonomous spacecrafts and software designed to counter space-based threats. True Anomaly's CEO Evan Rogers joins us now. The relation to China is that many see space, the domain of space, as the next battleground, and China is a competitor in that space.
That's right. There's no question that China views the space domain as a battlefield. They think about it as part of an integrated approach to information warfare. And China really was the first mover in the modern era to build space weapons at scale. It started as early as 2007. The United States and its allies didn't face significant space threats after the fall of the USSR, but China started building space weapons as early as 2004, fielded them for the first time in 2007, and has really just scaled up. And in the meantime, the United States has largely been left in the dust of China from a space superiority standpoint. And they're really gearing up on launch.
And what Evan, therefore, is True Anomaly doing to rectify that, to rebalance, to ensure that US is winning?
So for the first time ever, the United States really needs dedicated space superiority capabilities. We've used the space domain for intelligence. We've used it for missile warning. It's the backbone of American economic superiority in many ways, and certainly military superiority. But now we have to defend that infrastructure. We need to defend the high ground and use the high ground for integrated information warfare. So what we do is we build countermeasures and dedicated space superiority systems that are designed to protect that infrastructure in space and from space.
You are, with respect to sort of lower volume of production right now in those autonomous craft, but going back to the headlines from the president on tariffs and therefore supply chain, how would that impact your industry?
The industry writ large will experience impacts from this. As you pointed out, True Anomaly doesn't build at the volumes yet, but in a couple of years, when space superiority systems are fielded at scale, we'll experience significant impacts.
How do you, therefore, think about national security of your own future supply chain, and in that the entire ecosystem that needs to win out for you to service it?
I think we're operating in the same vein that Brian was actually just talking about, which is the urgency and impetus of onshoring manufacturing, tapping in to the industrial base that the United States has experienced, investing in that, investing in talent.
Is the government investing enough in that?
I think we're starting to see the crest of that, but not remotely close to enough with respect to what we will need, especially as China starts to become more aggressive.
Evans, the CEO of True Anomaly, we're here live at Anduril's headquarters. We were talking about defense technology. Then the president broke that news of increasing tariffs on China. The bond market's reacting. That's super important. Who leads this race in space? Seriously, does America really carry the way forward? Or you talked about China's first mover advantage. Are they ahead in certain aspects?
In certain aspects, there's no question that China is ahead. The United States took too long to build defensive and offensive capabilities. In fact, doesn't have any fielded at scale today at all. So we're really behind from a defensive standpoint. The United States exploits the space domain in ways that China is starting to catch up on, but not yet.
I have to ask you about a story I broke yesterday.
Right.
My understanding is that Jared Isaacman has been meeting with President Trump and that they are discussing a path forward for a renomination. Your industry, your reaction to the idea that Jared Isaacman might actually be in charge of NASA at the end of the day?
I don't know Jared. In fact, we're not deeply involved in civil space. We're pretty focused on military applications of space. But I think Jared is widely respected and would make a great NASA administrator.
When you're thinking about government needing to lean in to the supply chain and the local manufacturing, what does Pete Hegseth, what does the Defense Department need to be doing to clear the way for you and for your private sector to step into any void that thus has been left?
I think they've planted some really important early seeds, which is to say that space superiority is a priority. The presidential policy is supportive of this. The Defense Department is starting to shift capital into technologies that are designed to exploit and continue to exploit the space domain and protect infrastructure. I think there's more work to be done there, but you can see the shifting budgets from legacy programs that are big monolithic capabilities, $1 billion per satellite, into proliferated low-cost architectures that really resemble swarm technologies and capabilities that we're starting to see fielded in other domains. We're at the forefront of that. We're building low-cost, dedicated space superiority platforms that are designed to defend infrastructure in space. It's very different from a performance envelope standpoint that exists today for other spacecraft. Most spacecraft are designed to look at the surface of the Earth. Our spacecraft are designed to engage.
And therefore, you need to keep on building for that unique capital of your own. You've been raising money, Series C. How do you see private sector desire to back defense tech right now, and will you raise again soon?
We will raise again soon, particularly as we start to think about our place in future defense tech applications like Golden Dome, et cetera. My experience in the capital markets has been that there's a lot of support and interest in defense tech, and a lot of support and interest in space. So we benefit from the intersection of both of those trends.
Certainly, we've seen plenty of IPOs doing very well at the beginning of the year, all related to space. Evan Rogers of True Anomaly, a joy to have you here, right here at Anduril's headquarters. Coming up, we sit down with Vannevar's Vice President of Mission, Erin. That's next. This is Bloomberg Tech. The meeting between President Trump and President Xi is off. We understand we have a special Bloomberg Tech here from the headquarters of Anduril as we lean into the relationship from a national security perspective of US versus China. S&P 500 off by more than a percentage point. Tariffs will be increased. We are thinking about the repercussions of rare earths not getting into the US or indeed globally from China. And we turn now to a company that is at the heart of US-China competition, Vannevar. It is at the forefront of this competition when it comes to defense. And in particular, when we think about software and indeed hardware, it brings together multidisciplinary groups of people and engineers from some of the top tech companies and startups to develop really the ecosystem for national security missions. Erin is with us. She's Vice President of Mission for Vannevar, is one of those key people leading the company's national security deployments. You have a history with air defense. You have a history with government. What do you make of US-China relationships right now? How important is the competition?
We think it's the defining conflict of this generation, possibly the century. I think the conceit of Vannevar is that China has a vision for this century, and we're here to make sure the U.S. has more leverage in that competition. The entire conceit of Vannevar, when we sort of pivoted in 2020 from counterterrorism to strategic competition, was that it's an entirely different mission that requires massive data collection behind the Chinese firewall and AI and agentic workflows working on top of that to find the exact data that warfighters need at the right time for that particular mission.
Vannevar's mission statement is building the defense prime for competition with China. The headlines that we've just broken that are moving markets are about China as an economic adversary.
Yes.
I'd be grateful if you just sort of explained building the defense prime competition with China. What does that mean?
What that means is that we think that the warfighter in particular has a big part to play in imposing cost on China. So we think the way that the Department of War has done it wrong in the past, that there was a real data gap and that they couldn't actually understand the Chinese information environment for everything from, intelligence analysis to logistics to planning, deployments, exercises, even procurement. How do you actually know that the actions that the U.S. is taking are imposing cost on China, that they're perceiving that there's a cost to their either aggressive action or even economic action, coercive action globally, information operations? We think that you have to understand that in order to use your assets, procure, deploy appropriately in order to make sure that their cost-benefit analysis of any aggressive action goes down over time.
You are at the sweet spot of really the hype cycle when it comes to defense tech, but also AI and agentic AI. I'm trying to understand what data you're looking at and what you're building these agentic AI platforms upon.
Yeah, primarily what we do is we build tech stacks for decision advantage, and we are focused on China. The important thing is that those tech stacks are built on top of what we think is the premier national security focused data set on the market. We have spent 6 years building this data set to include information behind the Chinese firewall. A quarter of our engineers are focused specifically on data collection. We manage a petabyte of data right now. It's increasing by 10 terabytes a week.
Who's the customer, therefore?
Sure.
Who are you selling this to?
We are deployed across all of the services in the Department of War. And we are deployed across all of the geographic combatant commands as well.
I'm putting you on the spot, but these headlines, how severe a change of direction is this for the relationship between the US and China?
I think it's pretty severe. I mean, I think that there's, going back and forth, I think that we're waking up to the fact that China has had a real, like I said, plan for this century, that they have been doing what we call a dual use, so military, economic, coercion globally, and that it's had an impact on our strategic allies, and that we've sort of lost a little bit of the fight there.
We have so much to cover still in the balance of the show, but you're one of the experts on this domain. Really grateful to have you here at this Bloomberg Tech Defense Technology Special. That's Erin of Vannevar. Coming up, and there is a lot more coming up, we're going to speak with Palantir CTO Shyam Sankar, Benrock partner Morgan Hitzig, and Anduril co-founder Palmer Luckey.
Let's just remind everyone of the breaking news that we do indeed have markets under pressure from the fact that US-China relationship is unraveling once again. We had thought this meeting between President Xi and President Trump would be occurring, and it is not, and tariffs therefore unleashed once more.
Stocks down, semiconductors in particular, yields dropping, the bond market moving, but still, we are here talking about defense technology. Yes. What's changed is China as an economic adversary to what's next. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg Tech. Welcome back to a special edition of Bloomberg Tech, live from Anduril's headquarters in California. The breaking news of the last hour: on a Truth Social post, President Trump says that he was due to meet with President Xi of China in the next 2 weeks. He now sees no reason to do so. He is threatening massive increase in tariffs on Chinese goods, and he is saying that China is becoming more hostile. Markets are reacting. We went from a place where most major indices, in particular the technology sector, were modestly positive. We're now down almost 2% on the NASDAQ 100. We are down almost 4% on the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, or SOX. Also look at bond yields and the lows that they are now at in response to this story. Our interpretation of that post is that the meeting between the presidents is now in doubt. We have no confirmation that it's off. Software is also a critical domain. From the factory floor to the front lines, Palantir has become one of the most influential forces in AI and the use of data across government and industry in the West, from defense to finance. Joining us here at Anduril is Shyam Sankar, Chief Technology Officer at Palantir. Your reaction, please, to the president's statement earlier.
Well, it's great to be with you. I think this is really a conflict that's been brewing for the better part of 50 years. The Chinese are showing their hands. And it comes down to a fundamental philosophy they have as an outgrowth of the Warring States period. That's when Sun Tzu wrote Art of War, which is that there has to be only one hegemon. And so it's not enough for China to prosper. America must fall. And this is the tension in the relationship. It's not how Americans view the world. We have a very positive sum view. No country has done more to alleviate poverty in China than America. But reciprocally, no country has done more to undermine American prosperity than China has.
And you have said time and time again that we are at some sort of undeclared Cold War. Do you see at the moment this a ratcheting up of leverage ahead of, again, eventually some sort of meeting and some sort of deal? Or do you think rare earths are going to become increasingly hard for the Western nations to access?
I think it's going to spread from rare earths to many other things. We have to remember that Chinese make 50% of our generic drugs. You know, what is it going to be like for the average American to choose between fighting for freedom and prosperity and watching their 5-year-old suffer, potentially die from a trivial ear infection? You know, there's a whole swath of capabilities. It's, you know, we've so narrowly focused in the American mindset on the military dimension.
Yes.
But really, this is an industrial dimension. We have to remember that China has subsidized their industry to the tune of roughly 5% of GDP a year. You know, so their businesses are not principally about competing in a fair and open market. Their businesses are about driving shutdown economics. How do I create an industrial base that's so strong that it drives the industrial bases of other countries out of business?
Your focus is and has been reindustrialization, but I think there'd be a lot of value in explaining the role Palantir's playing in that, be it, you know, from a strictly defense point of view, but you also work, you know, with the
more than
sector,
half the business is commercial.
Right.
You know, 50 different industries, from energy and mining and pharmaceuticals. We build every Chrysler and BMW and Airbus airframe and HD Hyundai ship. And one of the real lessons here is you have to lean into your asymmetric advantages. In the David versus Goliath battle, the Chinese absolutely have pound for pound more industrial capacity today. Well, what are our asymmetric advantages? We definitely have the best software as a nation in the world. We also have AI. And AI is not about AI. It's not about AGI. It's not about transhumanism. AI is about applying it towards all the other weaknesses that we have. How do you make the American worker 50 times more productive? The normative value here is to give the American worker superpowers so that you can reindustrialize, so that all the things that today we perceive being beyond the efficient frontier of being made in America can be done here. You can look at an example with Panasonic Energy and their battery factory in Sparks, Nevada. You have a 3-year apprenticeship journey to go from being someone you hire off the street, mostly in Reno, they're coming from casino, to managing this high-end, exquisite Japanese technology. Well, with AI, that's 3 months. You know, so you can see how it drives prosperity, employment, retooling. It changes the very nature of our economy. And I reject the message that's coming up the street here from Silicon Valley, the ivory tower doomerism, that is just going to result in mass unemployment. I live on the factory floor. You know, I live in the ICU beds. The nurses are the first people to adopt this. It gives them more time to be with the patient. Or the submarine industrial parts manufacturer, where they have more time making the parts, less time munging the data to do it. I see a renaissance of how AI is actually empowering the blue-collar worker to get more done.
I want to bring us back to the headlines from the president in China, but in March you have a book coming out called Mobilize. I haven't read it, it's not out, but my interpretation is that you basically want to have some kind of national effort for deterrence. And I'm trying to understand deterrence of what?
Well, I think about it as the greatest risk to our country is not homicide. I'm not worried about the Chinese per se. It's suicide. It's that we lose the plot on what's actually happening. We're not focused enough on American greatness, that we don't believe in the need to aspire to do great things. Reindustrialization is part of that. If we're focused on moving the ball forward in this country every single day, we're going to be fine. We're not today. But I think that it's coming increasingly into focus.
There is this desire to run fast and break things once again a little bit in the world of defense and AI. And there has been reporting that perhaps some of the technology that's being built between where we sit right now, Anduril and Palantir, communications and GC2, was perhaps going too fast into the armed forces' hands, and there was questioning about its efficacy and its reliability. That has been pushed back. There has been a view that maybe that was old news that had been reported on by Reuters. What do you make of the reporting, and can you bring us up to speed with how diligent you are about the safety of the use of what you build?
Yeah, well, we're incredibly diligent about it. I think, if anything, we need to move even faster still. It is old news and inaccurate reporting. There are no vulnerabilities in the software. But we need to lean into this idea. This is the fundamental lesson of Ukraine. It is not what your weapon system does today. It is how quickly it adapts to what it needs to do tomorrow. What we should be training with, practicing, fighting around is adaptability, not the zeroth derivative, but the first derivative. And the person with the best first derivative is going to win. That's John Boyd's OODA loop. encapsulated right there.
Shyam, I think what's so interesting is how global you can go for us. And Palantir is the bedrock of what software is being built in the United Kingdom at the moment. When we think what's happening just internationally, what the news is breaking today is an internationally driven story because rare earths have been cut off to Europe from China, not just to the US. How do you feel about geopolitics writ large at this moment and how Palantir is feeding into a Western strength or not?
I think that's the exact right question. Who is buying the Iranian oil? Who's keeping Iran afloat right now? The Chinese are. Who is building? We like to say Ukraine's building 4 to 5 million drones a year. Ukraine's assembling 4 to 5 million drones a year. The Chinese are building the parts for those drones. The Chinese are building drones on both sides here. Wang Li, the foreign minister, has told Ursula von der Leyen the Chinese have no interest in settling the Ukraine conflict. They view it as a proxy war with the West. They've been very explicit. We ought to listen to them and take them literally.
Shyam, in a world where the relationship between the US and China deteriorates, the critics of Palantir say, this is great for Palantir. This is what you want. You will thrive in an environment where there is conflict, economic or otherwise. Is that a fair sort of criticism, or is it something you say, oh, we absolutely accept that?
The vast majority of our business will continue to be commercial. The commercial business is growing twice as fast as the government business. No one with children seeks conflict in this world. This is the world we live in. We lost deterrence in 2014. The Russians took Crimea. In 2015, the Chinese militarized the Spratly Islands. We don't intend to be useful idiots that are along for the ride who are not saying what's actually happening. You could have made the same arguments in the 30s around the Nazis. Oh, you're a warmonger. You're a warmonger. Well, turns out the Nazis were a real problem.
On that note, we don't want to be glib that you make such important points, and we are so thankful for your time here when we are based, of course, in Anduril's headquarters. It was, of course, Palantir's CTO, Shyam Sankar, sat with us, really talking through what the longer-term ramifications of today's news really could be, Ed.
Yeah, the data is important. Companies have until October 16th to bid for the $151 billion SHIELD project from the Missile Defense Agency, part of an effort to make President Trump's planned missile defense system, or Golden Dome, a reality. Bloomberg Gov data shows these companies have dominated Pentagon contracts for missile defense. But the administration says it wants to partner with more startups. And it is. Anduril, Scale AI, and Epirus have collectively seen Department of War contracts increase nearly 700% from 2021, $1.7 billion combined. Compare that to Lockheed Martin, which alone has Pentagon contracts totaling nearly $40 billion just this year. The SHIELD project is an attempt to change that, and VCs are betting on this as a long-term shift, investing far more in defense startups than those companies that are currently and actually winning in contracts. Investors are leaning on ties to the Trump administration, forging closer connections between a traditionally slow-moving government and the fast-paced tech sector. We will see how that pays off. Karen.
Well, let's dig into the paying side and the money and investors' interest in defense tech. Morgan Hitzig is with us. She's the partner at Venrock, focusing on early-stage tech startups, especially in national security, public safety, and the critical infrastructure space. When you hear breaking news that once again, perhaps the relationship between US and China is unfolding, what does that mean for you in terms of the velocity at which you need to allocate money to the startups that are willing to strengthen national defense?
Well, thank you both for having me here. There are a couple of different things that we think about when breaking news like that comes up. I think, one of the critical timelines that we've seen the Department of War really highlight is this 2027 time horizon of how do we get ready to prepare to fight if we have to. And one of the ways that we think about it on the startup side is just how quickly can we get capital flowing to the right types of subsectors. And so that capital is starting to flow, the reforms are starting to happen, we're aligning both capital and reform in a really critical way.
Is the Department of War doing enough from the reform perspective?
I think so. I think I've never been more optimistic than I am right now because you have leadership talking about a variety of different programs. Secretary Driscoll over the last couple of weeks actually announced the Army's FUSE program, which is a $750 million sort of strategic venture capital firm for the Department of the Army, at least, to start to bridge the gap between early stage startup, which we invest in at Venrock, and true scale, which is necessary for the Department of War.
Morgan, for the audience that's just joining us, we are live at Anduril in Costa Mesa, California. We were and are having a special show focused on defense tech. The president posted on Truth Social. In that post, he said he had been due to meet with President Xi of China in 2 weeks and now sees no reason to do so. He called China increasingly hostile, and he has threatened a massive increase in tariffs on China. In that moment, markets fell. You know, that's what has happened in the last 40 minutes. Is there a direct impact on private markets? In other words, when you are looking at a term sheet or there's a pitch deck on your desk, are you thinking this is now a more attractive investment opportunity because of something the president says on Truth Social?
I think one of the key factors that comes into play with news of this kind is startups are not immune to supply chain risks. And so I think one of the things that we end up thinking about is how does the supply chain get impacted by something like tariffs? We've got a whole host of companies that are US based that are starting to fill the gap. We're here at Anduril. Anduril is one of them that are starting to fill the gap with the domestic supply chain, but it's still a challenge.
And Morgan, all of this breaking news, this Truth Social post was sparked by the fact that China was once again really resisting allowing rare earths to go from China into Western nations.
That's their bargaining chip. Yeah. That's their thing.
Their leverage. And how much has that impacted the startups that you've backed thus far?
So we've seen a variety of different startups start to play in the critical minerals space. It's one of those domains that would not typically have been venture capital backable businesses previously. But one of the things we're seeing is the Department of War and the Department of Commerce really aligning budgets around these types of opportunities that create big potential return profiles for venture.
Morgan, a year ago, Caroline and I were at Rocket Lab, and the conversations we had centered around how SpaceX had established this space industry in Southern California, had ripple effects and built out commercial space in America. Is Anduril doing something similar in defense technology?
Yeah, Anduril and Palantir actually, Shyam was a great representative for Palantir just a few moments ago. I think both Anduril and Palantir have led to an influx of talent that we would not have otherwise had building for this problem space. So we're seeing a ton of startups founded by former folks coming out of both Anduril and Palantir. But from a risk standpoint, I do believe there's a risk of potential over-consolidation. If we have the neoprimes of today, the Palantirs, the Andurils as our monopolies of tomorrow, I think we've failed.
And so therefore, you keep on feeding the next generation of Andurils and Palantirs. I'm interested as to whether the valuations are healthy from your perspective. We've had so much desire to get into the early defense IPOs that happened, particularly space-orientated ones this year. We're in a government shutdown, but there is real want from the public markets to back these businesses, and it must affect valuations in the startups.
The opportunity is massive. That being said, I'll borrow a Trey Stevensism. We've seen a bunch of kamikaze rounds, some of these rounds that are super healthy from a valuation perspective, and they're really early. We haven't quite seen the budgets catch up to where we're seeing these valuations. The Department of War is one of these places where we know how much capital is going to be spent in a particular domain, in hypersonics, in critical materials, but we haven't quite seen the promise come out yet.
Well, you've backed Aditon, we think a data miner, Genlogs. It's incredible, some of the portfolio that is being built. Morgan Hitzig, partner at Venrock, we thank you. Let's just return to the public markets. We've had a healthy check on the private ones. We are in sell-off mode for this Friday. The reaction to the news, the Truth Social post coming from the president that he sees no reason now to meet with President Xi, as had been anticipated by the markets, and maybe more tariffs should be dialed up as he feels that China is becoming more hostile, Ed. You see the reactions from tech stocks, but the S&P 500 writ large.
Yeah, there is a more profound reaction in chip stocks. You know, a lot of the conversation of the last 45 minutes has been about a negotiation, economically speaking. Rare earths on the Chinese side, semiconductors on the American side. You look at some of the individual names, AMD and NVIDIA, of course, because the other news we got overnight is that Congress finally ruled on their ability to export to China, volumetrically speaking.
And we'd had David Sachs on previously talking about whether indeed that is a national security threat to be allowing some of those sophisticated chips to be exported into China. We can keep this sort of conversation going.
Yeah, David's point's really simple. It's better to sell deprecated chips than none at all, but we need something in return in an economic negotiation. We are live at Anduril's headquarters in Costa Mesa, California. This is a special edition of Bloomberg Tech. And right now we're joined by Anduril's founder, Palmer Luckey, to close out the conversation. It's good to see you.
Happy to host you here at HQ, and thank you for having me on the show.
A curious piece of timing. My assumption is that the president's Truth Social post was scheduled for 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. We don't know. But it's very simple. He had said that he intended to meet with Xi in 2 weeks' time, now doesn't see a reason to do so. He threatened to massively increase tariffs on Chinese goods and says that China is becoming increasingly hostile. When you and I met in January, you opened our entire conversation with a forecast on where you felt the relationship between US and China was going.
Yep.
Were you right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the reality is that our interests are relatively divergent at this point, and that's particularly true when it comes to semiconductors, when it comes to Taiwan. And so Trump, I think what he's doing right now is he's playing the art of the deal. He's trying to get the best deal that he can, and I understand that he has to manage this reality that right now we are kind of dependent on China for a lot of things. But I think what we talked about last time is this is why we need to reindustrialize. This is why we need to have our own rare earth supply. This is why we need to be able to make our own chips and our own computers and our own products downstream, because it takes away leverage from China. They do have a lot of leverage right now, and so it's very hard to make deals with them. I think it's actually healthy for the U.S.-China relationship for it to not be so dependent on China. Right now, we don't have great solutions.
Can you kind of quantify it? I mean, so you're so involved in Arsenal 1, we will talk about that. But right now, the weapons that Anduril makes and the autonomous systems, how dependent is that specific supply chain at this moment on China?
Anduril's done a uniquely good job of getting away from China versus not just other defense companies, but also compared to most American companies in general. Remember that we are sanctioned by China. Remember that our executives are personally sanctioned by China. And so we have, we're not doing this for leverage or negotiating reasons. We have to get off of Chinese supply chain, and not just things that are literally made in China, but even things that are dependent on China. So if it's dependent on Chinese precursor chemicals or Chinese equipment or machinery or processing, we have to make very aggressive moves to stay away from that and keep a U.S. and allied supply chain to the absolute greatest extent possible. So I would say Anduril's not even really what I'm concerned about. It's the broader economy and maybe some other defense companies. If you could believe it, there's lots of U.S. defense companies that haven't been sanctioned by China.
And therefore, they haven't had the foresight to go and build it as you are in Ohio. How is that going? How is Arsenal managing to hit the milestones you want to see?
So Arsenal is not just important, but it's necessary. So you guys know it's about 5 million square feet of manufacturing capacity that we're building in Ohio. We have to build it. We have so much volume that we just have to output that we can't do it without that new site. We started building that site many months before the government gave us these contracts that are now going to fulfill its capacity. And thank goodness we did. Like this year, our production is up 400% over last year.
Sorry, as in Arsenal?
Non-Arsenal one. No,
okay.
I'm saying our non-Arsenal production is up 400%. And then so next year, we expect to see an equally large bump up, and that is going to be critical for Arsenal to come online. We actually already have the first round of employees who are going to be working in Arsenal. We brought them from Ohio to HQ. They're going to be here for the next 6 months. Or I guess it's less than 6 months now. They've been here for a while. And that way they're able to get indoctrinated in our processes, work on our existing manufacturing systems. And then when Arsenal 1 opens next year, they can go in and hit the ground running day one.
What do you need from the Department of War?
What do I need from the Department of War? I'm getting a lot of the support that I need. I mean, across the Navy and the Army and the Air Force, there is a recognition that we don't have time as a country for business as usual, that we need to move much faster, that we need to be building new things in new ways, that we need to design weapons that can be manufactured by the industrial base we have, the talent base that we have.
And we've got that talent?
Oh, the country has the talent in spades. They're just working on the wrong things. Most of our best talent, contrast this with the Cold War, is no longer working on national security problems, but is working on things like advertising optimization, on new apps, on tools of entertainment rather than tools of deterrence. And I've seen that reversing. There's a lot of people, and I'm of all ages. We're talking people who have been in the industry for 20, 30 years, all the way down to kids who are just going into school, learning disciplines that are relevant to aerospace and defense. I think that there's a lot of people who are realizing we've been resting on our laurels and coasting for a couple decades, and that our tech industry has to get in gear and work on more important problems.
Palmer, there was a report about the NGC2 system. It named both Anduril and Palantir. We've asked Palantir through Shyam to comment on that. But the report in Palantir's case moved markets. Could you just respond to that reporting, which came from Reuters, and explain the sort of timeline and the inaccuracies that you feel there are in that report?
So you may or may not remember this, but I was a journalism major myself. I was only a semester and a half away from graduating. I was the online editor of the Daily 49er, which was the Cal State Long Beach student-run newspaper. So I care a lot about this stuff, both as a Anduril perspective, and then also just from a journalist perspective. The journalist who wrote that Reuters story would have been failed out of the class by any of my professors. He refused to include our on-the-record statement. He refused to include the on-the-record statement from the Army because they fundamentally made the whole story not a story. There was an analysis saying, hey, there's all of these security problems like the system, the prototype for NGC2, Next Generation Command and Control. It's not tracking what the users are doing. It doesn't have any passwords to log in. There's no security turned on. And they said, oh my God, this is a huge problem. And we said, guys, this was an early prototype. The Army wasn't paying us to demonstrate user accounts. It was paying us to demonstrate integration of different sensors, different weapon systems, all into one pipeline. And Lattice has all this functionality. We do this all the time. It's not like we don't know how to do this. And the Army said the same. They said, yeah, we just turned on all those features. Just a few weeks later, all these issues that you're talking about didn't exist. This was an internal security audit, just noting that these things were a factor in that early prototype. Yes, there's no access control. Yes, that is a risk. Yes, we have not audited all of their security, all their security code. That is a risk. But that's completely normal for early development. But Reuters didn't include our quote, didn't include the Army's quote, because that would have made the entire story irrelevant. So instead they include quotes exclusively from our competitors and from so-called anonymous sources saying that Anduril and Palantir are running this fundamentally insecure thing. 99% chance that was planted by one of our competitors who had access to that memo, and there was only a few people who could have done it. And I can make people look bad by slicing and dicing memos too. I'll show you if I want. I'll get back into the journalism game.
We can say pretty definitively we've given you the opportunity to comment on that report.
You absolutely have. I'm using this opportunity to attack my enemies.
You just mentioned your competitors. Let's call them legacy primes, right? Before you came to set, I read the data piece about still the dominance of those companies.
Yep.
In proportionately war contracts that the Department of War contracts they're getting versus Anduril. They're still getting them, Palmer.
Look, I remember I did not say that it was necessarily a prime who planted it. There's a lot of people who are competing. I think there are like 40 companies competing for NGC2. I'm not saying that it isn't. I'm just not saying that I didn't say that it is. Look, these guys are still winning a lot of contracts. The reality, whether we like it or not, is that these companies do have a lot of important weapons capability. We don't want them to go out of business. We don't want them to fall over. Anduril's working with a lot of them. I mean, that's my bias here. I mean, we're working with Raytheon. We're working with Lockheed. We're working with Northrop. We're also competing with them for programs. I think that in general, the industry needs to move towards a model where companies invest more of their own money in these products. Where they fail, they need to skin their own knees, not the knees of taxpayers. And companies disagree as to the extent of whether that should be true. I think companies like Anduril in the short term and the long run are going to do much better, especially because the services want to see more companies acting like Anduril. They want us to have more skin in the game. They want everybody to have more skin in the game. And they know that it incentivizes the right kind of behavior.
Talking of skin in the game, there are a lot of retail investors, a lot of institution investors who want more access to be able to skin their knees when you slip up, but also benefit from your growth. When are you going to IPO?
So it's going to be in the next few years, and we've talked about this before, but
but it's still the #1 question we get for you. It is. It just is.
So look, we are on a path to IPO. Like I can explicitly say that. I'm not going to be coy about that. We are running the company as if we are going to be audited by the auditors that are looking at public company traded companies. We're running the company's financials as if we need to be accountable to public market investors. You need to be a certain shape of company to be in the public markets. You need to have a certain level of credibility in your accounting process across the organization. So like the old school Anduril stuff of, hey, toss it in the bin. No need to do any paperwork. No, you actually have to properly account for what's on the shelf, what you've thrown away, what's working, and we've gotten into that swing of things. It's going to be is going to be in low single-digit years. And by the way,
do you have to be profitable for that? Like, at the moment, it is very expensive what you are trying to build.
Agreed. So my philosophy on this is that if you are going to be in the public markets, you need to be the shape that the markets want you to be. I think that's not a very unprofitable company that has a trend that looks very unprofitable. So my personal opinion, and I'm not hiding the date from you, we genuinely don't know. We're not going to do it till the right moment. We don't have to. Private capital is amply available to us. But what we want to do is either be profitable across the business, or we want to be on very close to it with a clear trend showing it's certainly going to happen. And I don't mean it's going to happen someday years in the future. I mean like, hey, we have these contracts, and if you just believe that we are going to deliver the things that we've already sold, then you know that we're likely going to be profitable.
Palmer, I'd like to talk about some of the weapons and autonomous systems that are behind us, if we can. You have both relationships with the US government and defense apparatus, but Western allies too.
That's right.
Are these prototypes, or do we see militaries around the world deploying them? Are they real? There are going to be loads of people watching this show that actually don't know Anduril, but also many skeptics say, like, you know, these are prototypes and this is a startup in its infancy.
Well, if we do our job correctly and we stop some of these major wars from starting, then people are going to continue to be unfamiliar with Anduril. The bizarre nature of our job and also the job of our military is that a better job we do of not having a fight, the easier it is for people to either not pay attention to us or, in fact, say, well, those guys are useless, we don't need them. It's only when everything goes to that everyone talks about how great the military is.
I'm going to jump in and apologize for the choice language to our audience, because it's quite early here on the West Coast.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I'm a young guy, and I've got really bad. I don't have like that English posh type of, you know,
passion.
Yes, exactly.
We accept the apology. Same question. Are these systems deployed in the real world by nations in case they need to use them?
So many of these systems are. For example, Altius has been in Ukraine since early in the war. We've also shipped a lot of these to nations that are really, I think, on the precipice of conflict, like Taiwan. Others of these, I think, have not been deployed by anyone but the United States. You know, Roadrunner has been deployed by the United States, but there are other people in other allied nations who are very interested. Same thing with Fury. We've already delivered the first Furies to the United States Air Force, but there's a lot of interest in Korea, in Japan, in a variety of European nations. Australia, you know, these are nations that are strongly allied with the United States, and they want to have commonality. Think of it this way. Everyone who's buying F-35s is bought into the U.S. plan of how we're going to fight and deter these wars. Something like Fury that tightly integrates with an F-35 is of a lot of interest to them, especially if it means they don't have to develop it all themselves, and especially if we're willing to manufacture it in their country, which we are. I think that we need to be having manufacturing bases across all our allies. One of the superpowers the U.S. has that China does not is friends around the world. China does not have friends around the world. They've got a couple buddies who have to suck up to them in their immediate local region, but they do not have people across the planet who are willing to work with them to build the war machine that we need to deter their aggression. We should be taking advantage of that, not pulling back on it.
We started on China, we end on China. Anduril founder Palmer Luckey, it has been a joy having you.
Thank you.
With the odd choice word. We appreciate it. Now that does it from this incredibly special edition of Bloomberg Tech. Of course, right here from Anduril's headquarters. It's been astounding. Let's just quickly check on the markets though, Ed, because we've been steeped in the discussion of US-China, and that is what's driving the Nasdaq lower, the S&P lower, and the SOX lower.
Yeah, look at the semiconductor names and how they've reacted to this news. We will continue to work out what happens next. We do not know if the meeting between Xi and Trump is cancelled. We're inferring that it is now in question, and so are the markets. Recap. This was a pretty astonishing focus on defense technology. You can do that on the podcast. You know exactly where to find it. Thanks to all of you that listen to the podcast. We've had a lot of feedback on that recently. Online, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, and always on Bloomberg.
And thank you to Anduril for hosting us. What phenomenal headquarters.
This is Bloomberg Tech.